Slowly she moved down the south aisle, past stained-glass windows representing various patron saints of the church, stern, bearded figures who she felt watched her shuffling progress with some disapproval, towards a stone altar and frieze representing the raising of Lazarus. In the silence of the church, Eve felt a moment of atavistic apprehension, as though the bandaged figure just visible in its rock tomb was about to elude Christ and the apostles and come towards her. She gave herself a brisk shake. That was quite enough of that. Bobbing awkwardly as she crossed the nave in front of the high altar, she checked the green and black checkerboard paving and wrought iron votive candle stands, all spotless. At St. Cecilia's shrine, Eve skirted the reliquary with its unsettling recumbent figure and checked the two prie-dieu upholstered in red velvet. Not a speck, she noted with pleasure. Unlike the splendor of the high altar with its imposing rose-colored marble reredos and copper-gilt tabernacle inlaid with jewels, the shrine featured a simple canvas above its modest granite stone table. As with the figure of St. Cecilia slumbering in its glass case, the picture's impact was unsettling. It showed a stone doorway in a rock opening inwards with a prominent keyhole and knocker. An old man leaning on a crutch hobbled through the door, while on top of the rock sat a young nude man looking upwards encircled in a nimbus of light. Beneath the canvas, running its full length, was a gilt brass plaque with an inscription. Eve leaned forward and whispered the words to herself like an incantation. "When the dread trumpet sounds, the long-committed dust shall wake, and every joint possesses its proper place inviolate." She felt light-headed, dizzy, as though she saw those dead priests under her feet, so bent and worn, rise out of their narrow cement cells, called back to life like Lazarus. Father Hassett said at the end of time each soul would have its own body, all perfect and glorious. But Eve blinked at the thought of God putting all the crumbled skeletons back together even better than before. It was too much to take in. She preferred to think of those good old men enjoying their long sleep in peace without being disturbed by trumpets sounding and the like. Slowly, with one last lingering look at the shrine, Eve moved towards the north aisle. As she did so, she thought she saw a shadow pass behind the net-curtained window of the little oratory directly above the south transept. No doubt the community was keeping vigil for Father Thomas, whose death was expected at any time. Eve crossed herself and said a quick prayer, thinking with affection of the gentle, unassuming priest whom she had often encountered at his devotions in the church, before increasing frailty confined him largely to the monastery. Rumour had it Father Thomas came from a very rich family, but he had no airs and graces. There was always a smile and a kind word for Eve. One of the stained-glass windows overlooking the north aisle featured St. George, very appropriate in Eve's opinion, while the other two showed obscure Anglo-Saxon queens whose names she could never recall. At the far end was a stone altar with a Pietà in an arched reredos. Motes floated in the sunshine, admitted by two small leaded windows above the altar, a shaft of light slanting onto a book of remembrance commemorating St. Cecilia's deceased parishioners. Gently, Eve drew a duster across the heavy gold tooling. At that moment, she heard voices directly overhead in the curtained organ loft. Self-consciously, the cleaner's hands fluttered up to pat her grey perm. She hadn't realized anyone was up there, hadn't even heard them come in. Squinting into the velvety darkness, she wondered if she should cough or call out, just so they knew she was there. It sounded like a heated exchange. One of the voices was well known to her. The pompous braying tones of St. Cecilia's organist, Nicholas Saddington, were unmistakable, but the voice of the other speaker sounded ghostly and disembodied in the echoey space above. Frozen with embarrassment, Eve shrank into a pool of shadow. Then, quite distinctly, she heard something very strange. So strange that she wondered later if she hadn't come down with a touch of heat stroke and imagined the whole thing. Footsteps.